usually. We start out in prayer, and so we'll do that.
Lord Jesus, we thank you that in the midst of our busy lives and our busy days, that we are able to carve out this time to just be together and to think on how you would have us strategize over this city. Lord, we just ask that you would give us creative, prospering ideas, that you would grant us safety and peace in our city, and Lord, help us as we plan that all we do would honor you. Amen.
Amen. And so before we get introductions, I also want to give everybody a reminder that we're going to be recording the presentation piece of this meeting, and only the presentation piece, so we can get information from our officers in that and keep that trusted relationship going. So if you could please give us with our introduction at the time.
Going Product Development Professional Consultants, LLC.
Todd Miller, Community.
Could you move to Juvenile Assessment Center?
Tim Whitey, Juvenile Assessment Center.
Joseph Siegel, Juvenile Assessment Center.
Deborah Vega, Operation Youth Success.
Rebecca Weitzel on the Juno Prizes and Aim for Aims.
Carolyn Grice, North Omaha Joint Community Ministries.
Eli Jolly, Network for Holistic Recovery.
Ron Gordon, Omaha Fire.
Sarah Bailey, ATV.
Steve Getz, ATV.
Mike Robert, Nebraska Control.
Ashley Ferens, Nebraska Medicine, Gustaldon.
Terry Ricketts, Metropolitan Community College, 180 Literature Program.
Donna Bryant, Lit, Ladies in IT.
Jeff Williams, Lit, Nebraska.
Fire and Middle Care Portal.
Lori Barton, Child Safety Teachers.
Jonathan Chapman, Step Up Omaha with the Empowerment Network and Church on Purpose.
Ashley Jones, Omaha Police Department and Boys and Girls Club.
Katie Knoll, Nebraska Children's Home Society. Sienna Salerno, Omaha Permaculture.
James Hunter, U-Turn.
Carla Desch, Operation Youth Success.
Janae Pancook, Operation Youth Success.
Shelley Salter, Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative.
Luke Ortiz, Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative.
Jamal Langdon, Racial and Ethnic Disparities Coordinator for Douglas County Administration.
Dawn Coffey, Opportunity Youth Community Liaison with Metro Community College.
Vanessa Hernandez, Heartland Workforce Solutions.
Dorothy Tex, North Community.
Sheila Nicholas, Compassion in Action and Omaha Rock on Stain Prevention Program, and a candidate for State Senator, District 11. Hi, Janae, it's been a while.
Tila!
Nancy Vardy, Trinity Lutheran Church, North Omaha.
Janae Gaines, UNO Admissions.
John Getchy, Trinity Lutheran.
Mickey Dietrich with the Omaha Public Library.
Susan Coleman, ODOT.
Robin Clay, Outreach Coordinator, Dream City Church.
Nancy King, Adoptee Unit at AC Rice.
Maxine Jackson, My Sister's Keeper.
Paul Stingray, Legal Women Rose, Snatching Village from Pentagon Equipment, Blackstone Government, Nolan, Omaha Community.
Judy Gutierrez, Cultural and Community Liaison for Partnership.
Joe Genetti, U.S. Attorney's Office.
Jose Palacios, U.S. Attorney's Office.
Terry Blackburn, Mayor's Office.
Jason Thompson, Region 6, Behavioral Health.
Skip Carter, Butler Gas, YMCA.
Michaela Danner, City Prosecutor's Office.
Sheena Glover, Omaha Fire.
Aaron Hanson, Omaha Police.
Rich Williams, Juvenile Probation.
Or Engineer, Northwest Precinct.
Marcia West, Northwest Precinct.
Scott Gray, Deputy Chief, Omaha Police.
Randy Preston, Mayor's Office.
Brett Mathis, Douglas County Attorney's Office.
Todd Johnson, First Responders Prayer, Good News Jail in Cruz City.
Cheryl Garrels, Christ for the City International.
Kim Ross Knight, Nebraska Civic Engagement Table, Charles Washington Branch Library, South Omaha Human Rights, and Omaha Public School.
Bruce Williams, Senior Pastor, Hope and Glory Church, Hope and Glory Ministries, and First Responders Prayer Walk.
I'm Bill Peterson. I'm the Men's Ministry Coordinator at Covenant Presbyterian Church, and also a volunteer with Good News Jail and Prison Ministry.
Kelvin McDonald, pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church and Good News Jail and Prison Ministry, Douglas County Jail.
Mark Litzies, Northeast Precinct. Ken Ganger, Omaha Police Department.
Sheree Thomas, Omaha Police Department, Detroit.
Bernard Brown, Future Young Entertainers.
All right, so just following suit with our agenda, I want to just kind of remind everybody about our conference coming up.
I think like a lot of us who went out there making promises in 2018, the work's still not done, but we have so much hope because of places like Omaha took the umbrella and ran with it and filled it up with your own dreams, your own hopes, and used that to bring people together around this issue. And one of the examples that he called out in that room and made really stand up and talk about was the Omaha Step Up program. So the President of the United States knows directly who it is, what work you all are doing here, and he's highly impressed about what's been possible here.
You're transferring the legacy that you inherited to you, which is what I call the business of you. And that's when we start to really look at you as an asset. So what we're focused on is elevating the standard of your business. You are an expert of what you want to do with the business of you.
I created a camp on entrepreneurship, and we brought it to Omaha this past year to really help high school students get introduced to entrepreneurship, but also to learn how to start a business, how to take a problem that they experience and start something with that.
A year ago, we came to the stage and we launched the Redefine the Game Institute. It is a cohort of African-American leaders who come together for professional development, 10 game-changing strategies to achieve success and find greatness.
And Dr. Pickett, where was the Redefine the Game Global Institute launched?
Right here in Omaha. At the African American Leadership Conference of Power Omaha, that's right.
So I want to just take that and utilize that time as to what did we do. We have been working very hard to get this conference organized and together. We have over 550 people who registered who will be there. So that's going to be a major event going on this Friday. And then also something that was very intentional that I really wanted to do is we've included a youth track. So we will have college students and high school students in attendance this year who will be participating in breakout sessions, and then also we'll do kind of a wrap-up summary with those students to figure out how we can keep them engaged and keep them actively involved. And so without anything else, I want to get to our law enforcement updates, and so that way we can go right into our presentation.
Do is OYS, and I'll introduce our other members. Shelley Salter, who is the coordinator for Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, and Ajamal Binden. He announced himself earlier, so apparently he's well known. The RED coordinator for Douglas County. And we're gonna this is really gonna be about a 30,000 foot view of juvenile justice. It's extremely complex and intertwined with child welfare, families, community, justice system. So if you would please just hold your questions to the end and we'll try and get to them. But we're gonna try and do this in an orderly fashion if at all possible. Okay, as I just mentioned, it's a very complex system, and I'm not even sure what slide we're on yet. Or how? Oh, here we go. Okay, maybe I'm a slide ahead. No, here, no, go ahead. Yeah, if you don't mind. Okay, yes, I will tell you. So we have police, schools, county attorney, public defender, families, siblings, courts, foster care, all these different system points, right, that are intersecting and intersectional in youth and juvenile justice lives. Within each of those systems are professionals, right? Many of you are around this room in your particular role. No one else can really fully comprehend the role of each professional person involved in a child's life. Despite our best tries and attempts to do that, it's hard to do that. I can't understand everything that the police have going on, or a county attorney, or the public defender, et cetera, on down the line. So we do, as much to our best intent, we are still kind of siloed. So what we try to do is actually connect the silos and share that information as much as possible amongst in between. So that's really Operation Youth Success. We're a private-public partnership. We have foundation dollars and community-based aid dollars that support the Operation Youth Success staff, which is 4 folks. Carla Dush, who's here often. Deborah Fag is here today. And then we have a data analyst, Catherine Riviere. So we really try and bring, many of you are on our work groups. If you're not, we'd love to have you on our work groups. Everything from school reentry, school-based arrest, families, juvenile justice council, which is lived experience, family council, we're trying to get going, which are family members or support of youth that have been touched by the juvenile justice system. So those voices are elevated. Prevention, and we also try and work on policy and advocacy. And we are starting now a SOGI task force and a restorative practice task force. And that's just, and honestly, that's a really good, those last two are examples of organic identification of areas of interest that the voice of those that are systems professionals, quite frankly, not systems facing people, but the consumers of the products many of us put out, so the youth and families. It's really about listening to them. They're the experts. They're the consumers. What can we do better? And so those last 2 task forces are actually emergent from their voices, from lived experience voices. Let's see. I feel kind of introducing you guys in what you do. So do you just want to tell about yourself? I know I have a narrative.
Well, I am Shelley Salter. I'm the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative Coordinator for Douglas County. And to just make it real simple today, my role is to coordinate working groups to reduce the number of kids that are housed at the Douglas County Youth Center. A lot of discussion about detention, I know here, a lot of discussion other places about those kids. We have several different working groups. One is a case processing committee. It's the county attorney, public defender, and a representative from the Douglas County Youth Center, working to make our juvenile justice system more efficient. How can we get kids through the system quicker so they're home and into services and not sitting in DCYC waiting to have that done? We have an alternative to detention committee that looks at exactly that. What are alternatives to detention for kids in Douglas County? When I hear Officer, I think it's Sergeant Hansen, talk about victims and the kids that we work with, we like to talk about things like restorative justice. How do we do victim offender mediation? How do we let victims know that they are important and that accountability is important, but at the same time, not lose one of our kids forever over a mistake they made when they're young. We have a racial and ethnic disparities committee that looks exactly like that. What do we know? We have a lot of data when it comes to the system point of detention, but what do we know about how our kids are entering and exiting by race and ethnicity? Do we know our system is fair? Do we know it's just? Do we know it takes the kids' developmental abilities into account when we're working with them? I've missed a committee. What is it? We have an objective admissions committee that looks at how kids are entering the system. We have a risk assessment instrument that probation uses to decide whether or not a youth should be detained or if they're able to go home. We have a committee that is, again, the county attorney, public defender, and probation that understands that instrument to make sure if we need any updates to bring that back to the state and that we're scoring those correctly so that we're being objective in our decisions when that happens. And then finally, we do have a data committee, and it's shared by both Operation Youth Success and JDAI, and it's exactly that. We're excited next year our data committee will start getting data at all the system points that we'll show you here in a little bit, because one of the ways that we know how we can impact strategies as it relates to kids who are actually system involved is to break the system down in points and look at data from each point, again, by race, ethnicity, gender, geography, and offense where we can. How are the kids coming in? How are they going out? So that we know if we need any culturally specific programming that we don't have now, and that kids are failing as a result of that. So that's kind of JDI in a nutshell. Again, always looking for people to join working groups. Janae has a website you can go on for an interest form, and I have some with me today also.
And I'm also invited the Racial Ethnic Disparities Coordinator, and part of my job is to look at the issue of race and some of the numbers that are out there related to children of color being inside the system. Many of you probably know there's a disproportionate number in Nebraska, particularly in Omaha, Douglas County. And my existence or job came into being where the state did not pursue the grant from the Office of Juvenile Justice. And so basically I was hired to help deal with some of the racial issues, particularly when you have the population in this community being around 33% people of color, maybe around 14-30% African Americans, the same amount for Hispanics. But why are there a disproportionate number in our criminal justice system issue? So part of what we're trying to do is look at each one of those system points and again build the social relationships, social capitals, and most of all, help to bring some of these community meetings, events out where folks can engage and push back and help us to try to transform the paradigm here in this community. By the way, this is not just something unique to Douglas County or our areas across the country. And so as I've gone to a couple of conferences, I've seen that other jurisdictions are addressing some of these same issues. So our goal is to maybe bring more of that kind of expertise elsewhere to here, and also to get more community involvement to push back and looking at policy and other different issues. They're extremely important to reverse those numbers.
Thank you. Act like you two have done that before. So here is really the crux of juvenile justice court and the responsibilities. Is anybody, I don't want to read this to everybody, any questions about what the purpose is? Yeah, thank you. I think the key for juvenile court that needs to be kept in mind, or juvenile processes, is that it is supposed to be rehabilitative. So I think there was, one of the officers commented regarding, a youth finding employment part-time to build up and then become full-time. I don't know about anybody else, but as a youth, a juvenile made some bonehead decisions, and I would be remiss to think that I should be held accountable for that for the rest of my life. So rehabilitation is our goal with juvenile justice. So here's who we serve. Juvenile, other than a traffic offense, since 2017. And in this case, we're talking about, I guess I'm a slide ahead, sorry. Infractions, state violations, city, village ordinances, 11 years of age at the time the act was committed. If they were under the age of 11, they will not go through the juvenile justice system, court system. They will go to Department of Health and Human Services as of July 1, 2017. So 3A cases, have people heard of 3A? 3B gets complicated sometimes. 3A is abuse, neglect, or no fault. And no fault is, it's really not the fault of the parents that a youth may be truant from school or, pieces like that. So that's where that no fault comes in. B is the section NRS 43327. That might mean something to our attorneys and our law enforcement in the room. And that's a status offender. Status offenders are offenses that are a crime or an offense solely due to the age of the person that committed the offense. So MIP, if you're over the age of 21, you're not going to get an MIP. So that's just one example of the age is what determined that that's an offense. C, mental health, and that's a hybrid, although we know that those numbers continue to go up. We hear it reported throughout the entire system about mental health challenges, and then traffic. So there's also some other key milestones. Child welfare is birth to 19, juvenile justice 11 to 19. Crossover would be there in the child welfare system and the juvenile justice system. There is another work group that falls underneath JDI Youth Impact that works solely with that population. And then Bridges to Independence is 19 to 21.
All right, so that really is a very simple overview of the system, and I know people hear this a lot because they hear kids referred to it as a lot. Are they 3A, are they 3B, are they 3C? So the thing to remember is A is abuse, neglect. Those are kids served out of the child welfare system. The beginning sections of that statute tell us in probation this is a child who's committed a crime, so that puts them under our jurisdiction. The B again is status offenders, so those are kids that don't necessarily have to go to probation, but they're kids who are violating something simply because of their age, whether it's MIP, running away, truancy, those kind of things. And then the 3C is the kids with mental health issues. We don't see those very often, but it does happen. So you all should have a copy of this, and I apologize, I know they're small. We have bigger ones we can bring back, and I can also send it to Ricky electronically for you all to have. So this is a map of the juvenile justice system in Douglas County. This map was created by our case processing committee through a community of practice with the Annie Casey Foundation. And I will tell you, when Casey asked us to do this, I thought it was so silly, because I believed that everyone understood how the system works, and the longer I'm in this job, the more I find out we do need to go back to basics on some of this stuff so people understand who these kids are, where they come from, and who's serving them, because I hear the system a lot, but I think a lot of times we don't exactly know what that means. So this is a copy of the system map. It's used as twofold. One is used to inform people in the community about how the system works. And then from a system perspective, this map has a really important purpose for us in that it shows us all the points in the system where an adult is making a decision about a child's life. So any point in the system where we know an adult is making decisions about a child's life, those are the things we want to look at. We want to know what the data looks like there. Again, by race, ethnicity, gender, geography, and offense. So we use this map for both of those reasons. And so everyone has a copy. Please feel free to share. They are really good for teaching people how kids move through. So there's a couple ways on how kids actually enter the juvenile justice system. There are 3 ways that can happen. One of the ways is through law enforcement contact. If the law enforcement officer cites a youth and decides that, for whatever reason, they're getting a ticket for whatever it is, that would be referred to the county attorney's office for next steps. A parent, and this does not happen very often, but it can happen where a parent or guardian would go to our county attorney's office and say, for whatever reason, I can no longer care for this child. I need help with this. And again, the county attorney then reviews that information and decides what would next steps be for this kid. And then finally through the schools, and it's the same thing. The schools can refer to our county attorney to let them know we have a youth that we need some help with. And the county attorney again then would decide what the next steps would be. So what are next steps? So these are the next steps here on the maps that you guys have telling us what the county attorney can do. And when they receive the information from whether it's the school, the parent, or law enforcement. They make a decision. And their decision is either to, one, it's called no lay cross. That means we're not going to do anything with this kiddo. We think he's going to redirect. Nothing needs to happen. And so a letter would be sent kind of saying, hey, you got in trouble for this. We're not asking you to do anything now. And that would be the end of it. But most kids redirect when something like that happens. They have the option of filing the charge in adult court. I know that's a common conversation in Douglas County. We have some kids that commit some real adult crimes and they find themselves in adult court. They have the option to file the petition in the juvenile court. So when the officer sends the information, the county attorney can say, yeah, you need the assistance of the juvenile court. The county attorney can also, when they receive the information, decide that a youth deserves the benefit of diversion. And I know diversion is something probably everyone's familiar with. In Douglas County, our diversion is handled through the Juvenile Assessment Center. So they can send a youth then and say, hey, we want you to go work with the Juvenile Assessment Center. We think that you can do some work with them. And then again, this is a youth that would redirect and not need to come into the court system. And then finally, again, on this crossover, it's not up here, but I just want to make sure everyone really hears what Janae was saying. So if we have kids that are state wards, they've been removed from their parents, either for abuse, neglect, or for a no-fault filing, and then they find themselves in trouble somehow with the law. We have a separate track for those kids, and it's called crossover. And they would be referred to the crossover team, which is at the Juvenile Assessment Center. And it's just a more holistic approach where they're looking at the ecology of the child, understanding their trauma, and working them from both a child welfare and then a juvenile justice perspective, because we know these kids should take a different path. So those are all the next step kind of decisions the county attorney can make. So again, I feel like the system sometimes is really huge, but when we break it down, it's not that difficult. There's 3 ways kids can get in, and then it's the county attorney's decision to happen, what happens after that. So detention. So this is the system point that I work with every day, all day. And so a part of this map, and it's the part over here on the left, it starts with law enforcement contact and then works down to the left. This kind of explains just this little section how kids find themselves detained. So officers have a couple options when they've decided that they have contact with a youth and there's going to be an arrest. If it's a ticket or arrest, I believe we use the same term when it comes to law enforcement contact in the data that we use. And so an officer can decide, I'm going to give you this ticket, you need to go home, call a parent guardian, release the child to the parent or guardian. They can decide that this is a youth for which they think detention is necessary. So when a law enforcement officer decides that they have a youth that they believe detention is necessary for whatever reason, they then call probation intake. And so the way it works in Nebraska is the officer calls probation intake, and the youth are screened. Now on your maps it says screening at DCYC. We do have something new for these kids where they're being screened by probation intake, where they're allowed to go to Child Saving Institute, and probation officers can do the interview there. That's for lower risk kids that we'll send that way because, again, it's part of that trauma-informed piece. If we don't need the youth going into the detention center, then we're not going to take them to the detention center. So we do have some kids who are able to be processed at CSI. So the intake officer for probation, and now that the youth's being arrested, the officer is called intake to say, we think we have a youth that needs to be detained. So then the intake officer does a series of interviews with the youth, not about the offense, because this whole time while we're working to serve kids and families, we have to remember there is an actual criminal process going here. So our officers do not talk to them about the crime that is being alleged at the time. They'll get information from them. They talk to the parent or guardian. If they're in a foster home, they would talk to them. Whoever it is that is responsible for the child at the time, they would have information. And then they gather information, and then they complete what is called a risk assessment instrument. So the probation intake officers have a tool. It's called a risk assessment instrument. I like the one we use in Nebraska because it does not appear to have any questions on it that would negatively impact a child because where they live or what their race or ethnicity is. It asks simply, what are they being presented for today? And there's a certain number of points for a violent felony compared to a misdemeanor or a status offense or why they're here. It'll ask things like, was this youth arrested before the age of 16? Because we know, generally, if people are arrested before the age of 16, it's likely we're going to see this kid again later on in his life. So there's different questions on there that bring the intake officer to an answer with their interview that tells them either they're going to release the youth home to their parents without any restriction or guardian. Probation intake officers can also release the youth to an alternative to detention, so they can put an electronic monitor, GPS on the youth. They can put them into a shelter or whatever alternative the officer deems appropriate. So it has two for alternatives to detention. So one is they could go home with an alternative, that would be like the EM, GPS, that kind of thing. They could go into an alternative to detention, which would be a shelter and out-of-home placement. Or finally, the probation intake officer decides that the youth indeed does need to be detained, and so they would be detained at that point. And again, these intakes can happen at DCYC or at CSI. So this is what it looks like once a youth is in the juvenile justice system. So Janae's work, although Janae definitely does a lot of work within the juvenile justice system, but her focus is really kind of the stuff outside of the map, the stuff that's not on the map yet, because she's trying to prevent kids from ever having the law enforcement contact with their parent or school calling, right? And Ajamal's work goes through all of Janae's work and all of my work, kind of the tie that binds all of our systems, racial and ethnic disparities, right? So the part on your map that is blue, this is what it looks like once a youth is on probation. So they'll have their initial detention hearing, and they're going to go home, go to an alternative or whatever it is, and then they'll come back to court where they will either admit or deny or plea or whatever it is at their first hearing, with the work of their lawyer, have decided what their plea is, and then from there they're put on probation. What we see in Douglas County is, when we look at the population of the Douglas County Youth Center, we see a lot of kids who are detained because they've either violated an order of probation or maybe run from a placement that they have been sent to. New charges in the 4 years that I have been here, new charges have been less. We don't see as many kids come in on new charges as we do kids coming in once they have violated some condition. So this blue part here is kind of a place where kids can continue to kind of run through the system because either they're getting a new charge or something will happen, or because they violated some term that puts them back into court, talking to the judge again, maybe some new orders will happen. But that's what the body of this map is here. So as complicated as our giant system is, I'm hopeful that just these couple slides helped everyone just to understand we have a child welfare system, we have a juvenile justice system, and when we're in the juvenile justice system, these are the only points we have. So part of what I do is try to help people understand this issue is not as big as we think it is. If we could just break down each of these decision points where adults are making decisions, get that data, and look at each point about what is the strategy we could use to make this system point more effective.
Just a quick second. The status of the status of but when you talk about status, because I think it's a key point here. The kids get in the system. With adult adults, they're not
Can't hear you.
trouble per se, but when adults are in the system, the status offense is very important. I think, and sometimes we don't know that, but as Shelley alluded to, if a kid gets into trouble and they get back in the system because they didn't follow the rules, it's a status offense. So that's a key issue that we're looking at, and particularly from my perspective in terms of RED. So I just want to make sure we know that that's a very key concept with young people.
Right, because one thing that I think we all agree that are working on juvenile justice reform, and part of the reason the three of us are together is because if this is a population that you want to work with, contact one of us. Because part of the problem that we have sometimes is that people are trying to impact a part of the system out here, and they feel like they're not allowed in and that we're not working with them, but we don't even know they exist, and maybe someone else is working on something, or our data is telling us what you're working on is not one of our key issues. So that's kind of one of the reasons all three of us are here today too. If it's about kids in the juvenile justice system and you want to help, please let one of us know.
And that time is almost over. It's almost 3 o'clock, isn't it? Wow. Question time too? But anyway, just two quick slides. One is the other systems serve development disabilities, and so you can see that again. The contact information is there, and if you need more information on that. And then of course, that clock was going fast.
So the state statute says that day and evening reporting should be utilized as an alternative to detention, but no one recognizes that and they don't utilize it. Data shows that an EM has never stopped a kid from running, but it does show that day and evening reporting is effective, but yet it's not being utilized as your map alludes. Alternative to detention should be utilized.
Right, and I know you and I have talked about this several times. You're right, statute says including but not limited to, and it includes day and evening reporting, and right now that is not one that's being used as an alternative to detention. It's our understanding that intake is yet to find youth that they think is appropriate for that service. It is one that our alternatives committee would like to see used, and used instead of maybe some other out-of-home placements, because I tend to agree with you, and I think you know that, because a lot of times what the county attorney is looking for, because our number one role really is, when I talk to you about these kids, our number one role is community safety first. And so I think day and evening reporting both lend to saying that the youth has someone who's supervising them for 8 hours at a time to help us know where they are. So yeah, I agree.
I appreciate you guys taking the time to give us this information, which in my opinion is overwhelming. And also the fact that with all these adults being involved in the lives of these children, I'm wondering how are the parents involved and how are the parents included in the process to assist them. Also the classification, when you have children that are there all together, and the time frame that they're there, like you said, some are there for truancy, some are there for running from a home, some are there because they're waiting adjudication because they actually committed a crime. They feel like they're just lost in the cracks, and most of them truly are. And so that's why, they graduate to Omaha Correctional Center or LCC, and that's when all the shutdowns happen because these kids come in there angry. And so, and also I like to, I'm throwing all the stuff at you guys. I'm going to NSP tonight to teach our class, and so I'm real emotional about this stuff. Where does Geneva sit in there? Where does our, the youth treatment and development centers, where do they fit? Where does, Utah Holly fit? Where do these other places fit for some of these kids to be rather than in kid prison?
All right, well, a couple of things, Tila, and a couple of us are going to have to answer you. When it comes to families, I'll let Janae answer that part because she has a great working group for that. But when it comes to the mixing of populations, that does not happen at DCYC. Status offenders cannot be detained in Nebraska. So I know there's data out there from a few years ago. Ajmal and I actually went to Georgetown last year, and actually Scott Gray was there too. And they put something up on the board saying Nebraska was number 2 in incarcerating status offenders. The data that they had is very old. We cannot incarcerate status offenders in the state of Nebraska, so that does not happen. You talked about the intergenerational piece of this. Absolutely, you're right. That's exactly why we're here, to try to prevent these kids from moving on to the adult prisons, and we all understand that connection.
It's not that it doesn't happen, though. I mean, again, we're talking about a kid who's 16 who's been placed on adult probation. So he got sent 30 days in DCYC because he got kicked out of school.
We only do the juvenile justice system.
I'm just saying it does happen. They just figure out ways.
But it wouldn't be a status offender because he's on adult probation because he's committed a criminal offense.
He's still 16.
But as far as being incarcerated is what we're talking about. He doesn't get incarcerated for not going to school. He gets incarcerated for a violation of his probation on his adult charge, correct?
Right, but we're not locking up every other kid who gets suspended from school.
No.
No,
we're not. We don't lock up kids for not going to school.
You did.
I can't do specific cases, and I think you know that, and it's also adult, so I can't speak to that. He would have had an adult charge, and it would be a violation of his terms. But wait a minute.
The Families Work Group. I'll connect with you. Families Work Group and a Families Council. We have a Families Work Group, meets once a month. And it's system-facing actors, and then we try and get lived experience family members there too. Again, to me, they're the experts in the room. And we're just 2 meetings into establishing a families council, which will actually be empowered to, they'll meet as often as that group determines, and empowered to influence and provide as much information, participate with steering committee members, et cetera, to drive the change.
I know you do a bomb.com job wherever you are, and I'm asking, is this a new group?
The Families is. The Families Council is. The work group has been around for 4 years, I'm gonna say.
4 years is new to me.
Yeah,
That's all.
that's on me, my bad. All that is. We come to meeting and we just, you get your head down and do the work, and I apologize for that. And anyone who's interested, as Shelley said, please reach out, contact us, visit our website to find out about all our work groups on there.
And Tila YOTC, I believe is 3 up from down.
I saw it in there.
Okay.
And I know Geneva's going through some things right now, and there's some processes for how we're gonna move all that around. I just hope they use everything that they need to use for the benefit of the kids.
This is for Ajmal. This graph here is a basic graph that shows the structure of entry and possibly exiting. I would imagine one of the main reasons why these types of sessions are held in this area is because there's some very unique problems that shows that this structure has absorbed disproportionate numbers. Have you been able to identify yet where and what areas disproportionate numbers can be looked at and identified in the early stages?
That's a good question. We have identified, part of my job is also to report to the federal government our numbers here in Douglas County. So we did a report and presented the information last year. We're also in the process now of getting the new additional data, but we haven't got it yet. We have to enter it to a memorandum of understanding with the police department. But one of the things that we've seen with each level, it is disproportionate in terms of people of color being in the system. The other thing, and I think it's probably the most important, even this is complicated. So what we're trying to do is bring more of these meetings in the community. We've had one in Clare and different places in our community to say, how do we have these conversations during working hours, during the evening time, to get more people involved to deconstruct it, because the average person, even professionals who deal with this, don't always know it. So you gotta make it real simple. And we also have to have the time to discuss this, because only when the community is involved can we really reform the system and make sure that it is much better.
What kind of time frame are you looking at before these meetings in the community start?
We've already started some, but our goal is to ramp it up. And this is one of the first meetings we've done together. One of our goals is to have a one-on-one, we're gonna have a 2-on-1, and so on and so on. And then we want community members to help identify other topics that we need to deal with. One of the things that my job is about, and I find this very somewhat sad, is that when I started to go downtown, I noticed a lot of meetings were held in office buildings. And one of the goals is, how do we bring these meetings out in the communities where people are there and so on. And so next year you should see a lot more of the 1-on-1s, 2-on-1s, and in specific topic areas where we're doing more of this engagement.
When you say meet with the community, and one of the things that's been identified, which we feel is a misnomer, is that we're identifying the concept of family. And we know, particularly within the African American community, the single parent household ratios are like 72% single parent households. So when we talk about coming into the community and dealing with mechanisms to identify why these numbers are disproportionate, when will those particular types of meetings start?
Our goal is to start as soon as we can. We're in the process of setting them up. And I know we're out of time, because I know when I used to hang out here.
Y'all stop talking and let us talk. But I got a question. I'm just a little bit curious, because Ajmal, you've been on the job over a year now, and we've been talking about these numbers, but you're still not giving us numbers. If there is the MC, why aren't you reporting that to us today? You're just telling us the same things that you've been telling us since you've been on the job at JDI. So I don't understand why you're wasting our time today.
Well, I work for Douglas County Administration, and I get the numbers from other system points, and as a fact, I work with Catherine Rivers to get the numbers from the various system points. We report the data to the federal government. I have a list of the latest data, which is from July to December 2018. And so our goal is every 6 months we're supposed to have data. I've not been able to get the data, the next range of it. But the way my job is set up is to attend meetings, deconstruct some of these whole community forums, and more than anything is how to reduce the data working with other systems. Again, county attorney, you name it, diversion, all these entities have data. And my goal is to say, how do we bring that out? So I only have one set of data for my first year reporting.
And just to add to that, that is exactly what the 201 we would like it to look at, where now everybody understands how we get the kids, who's serves them, and then taking each one of those system points and being able to explain to the community what it looks like at each one as far as race, ethnicity, gender, geography, and offense. And I keep saying that because it's a really important term in juvenile justice reform. It's REGO, and that's the acronym for it, and it's really important that we're not comparing apples to oranges. We need to look at kids exactly similarly situated so we know where desperate treatment's happening. So it's exactly what we want 201 to be, is what you're saying.
So that's going to be another year before you give us that data so that we would know for Douglas County?
I would hope not.
The data committee is working on this information now, but part of the process, you have to have an agreement before you can make some of this data appropriate or to the people in the community. And by the way, when we say data, it's composite. It's not individual kids or anything like that. And this is the same kind of data as in other jurisdictions where they actually post it on websites. So at any given point, if we do our jobs well, it's not about giving the data as much as having the data out there so people can get it. And then hosting meetings like these where people can say, give me some more information and drill down with it.
So are the number of juveniles being held in the detention center, has that been decreased?
About 60% in the last 10 years. It was over 200. It's a facility that used to hold 144, and we had over 200 at that time. They officially reduced their capacity to 96 about a year ago, and that is because DCYC decided to undergo what needed to be done to be in line with the Prison Rape Elimination Act. I think a major win for Douglas County to have a government agency say, look, we can honestly say we're never going to hold more than 96 kids here again. And so right now, our average daily population, if it's youth and adult kids on adult charges, is about 70. Our population that we look at specifically are the kids who did not score for detention, is 45 in the last quarter. So we have 45 kids that we know are kids who are not scoring for detention. It's difficult for me, I say often, we're talking about a caseload. And there's about 200 people working on what any probation officer or child welfare worker would tell you looks like a caseload. So in my opinion, it should move a lot faster. Those are the kids we're looking at. Once those kids are moved out of the detention center, then we would just have the kids on adult charges so we could really start digging into case processing issues related to those kids. Detention is the system point we have the data on right now, but that's what it comes down to, about 45 kids at any given time that we need moved into the community and back in their homes getting service.
Got one here. Hold on. So, whoa.
Sorry.
I keep getting as a moderator right there.
So I have a couple of quick questions, and I might have heard this wrong, but you said at some point an officer determines whether or not, I guess, they feel detention is necessary. I was just wondering. You did not say that?
A probation officer.
A probation officer. Okay. So
An
I'm
intake
wondering
officer.
how they determine that. And then I was wondering, you were saying that there's 3 ways that happens with law enforcement, parents, and school. And I was just wondering if you knew out of the youth who are within this system, I guess what percentage were coming from each?
I don't. That would be information that we would want. That's some of the data that we would want from the county attorney's office. So when law enforcement refers citations to the county attorney, again, by race, ethnicity, who's getting diversion, who's getting a letter saying, don't do this again, and who's going to court by race and ethnicity, because it would tell us a lot. It does in all systems. It's not just us. And then the risk assessment instrument is the tool that probation intake uses, that along with their interviews to determine whether or not the youth would be detained.
My question involves parenting. I've been volunteer with Good News Prison Ministry, and one of the classes I teach are leading a family. And when we talk about leading a family, nearly all the inmates that I talk to have never had a responsible male father figure in their life. And when I tell them how you lead a family, they say, nobody's ever told me that. And then when we talk about wounds of the father, you can't imagine the emotion that comes up. There's tears, there's yelling, there's everything. What is being done from the family? That this is a root cause, that we can eliminate a lot of this if we deal with this issue. What's being done there? I know this probably is outside Because you're in the,
Well, I think it's probably three different answers. I can tell you once kids are involved with the system, and this is not news, but I was a child welfare worker for a while, and when I first started, we never asked who's dad. Kids would go to termination and we'd say, oh no one ever published, no one ever told dad. And so it's always been my experience that regardless of what anyone's saying, if you reach out to dad, and even if he's incarcerated, there are a lot of men willing to step up for their kids if we just ask. So that's kind of my opinion on that. You have to ask. Because a lot of times someone will say, well, we don't have any contact with him. And what I found out in my years in this work is that maybe sometimes people don't always tell the truth. So find dad, ask him, because it's been my experience. And I have placed kids, I know with parents who I really had to fight to get it done, but it's their dad, regardless of his criminal history, as long as it's not any history where he's abusing or harming a child. Sometimes our dads go to jail, sometimes our dads go to prison, and it doesn't make my dad less of my dad. So that would be my answer.
Yes, it was just stated that the number of overall numbers within the detention has been reduced. Ajmal, can you tell us, even with that reduction, why it is that the disproportionate numbers are still the same?
You know, one of the things that I've noticed nationally and locally is that we have to get each one of the system points to report how they got there. And I think, it's been alluded to earlier that some kids get harsher treatment. And again, one example I throw out is that if we have the same crime and we have different situations where they're dealt with, that's how you get the disproportionality. But one of the things I keep pushing is the more people understand and you deconstruct this whole diagram, that's how you reduce it. In other jurisdictions and areas, these conversations are things that help us to say, what are the alternatives, what can we do? And again, RED exists in almost all the places that I know of, and this is why this position is there to say, how do we make it even more so? There's something wrong when you have a certain percentage of the population getting double and triple the rate of the percentages in these systems, juvenile justice systems. So our goal is to try to reduce that, Elijah.
And after 2 years, you haven't been able to identify why that particular demographic has not altered at all as it applies to the disproportion of numbers that are still being affected?
Elijah, I think Shelby alluded to, some numbers have dropped a little bit, but they're not dropped to the level we like to, but it's still proportionally high. The other thing is you got to get systems to talk to each other. And you also have to look at the instruments and all these kind of things. So it's been a process, and again, as someone who comes in with different eyes or looking at this whole process, I'm trying myself to make sure that we can make as much of this system accountable to that community, because we were finding out that it's much cheaper, of course, obviously, not to have kids into the system or experience some of this trauma of being locked up. That's when you've seen some of these laws passed recently to bring some of the young folks back into the community or not even have them go into those systems.
And I think as it relates to detention, it's exactly what we're talking about, Elijah. What we find around the country is we probably, and I could bring that data for you guys, and I don't want to give the number, I know it's 400 and something, and I can't think overall numbers of children of color that we see over the year is down, but you're right, the proportion of kids in the Douglas County Youth Center that are youth of color goes up as that overall number goes down, and that happens all over the country. And that's why I think now Douglas County is really in a position to look at those kids and say, we know every quarter what our top zip codes are. What is the alternative to detention that we need in 68111 that can respond to the culture that it needs to respond to? And I think that's where 2020 will bring our alternatives committee.
And is that still the understanding when even you state this is not only here, but it's national?
That's what we find. When the detention numbers go down, that nationally there's all kinds of 300 jurisdictions that are able to say they have half the kids that they used to have. But now with half the kids, what we see is the disproportionality goes up. So it might have been that 5 years ago, African American youth, and I'm lying to you guys right now, these numbers are not real, might have been, say, 70%, but now that you have 50% less kids, that number is 80%. So then 80% of the kids are kids of color that are detained. Overall numbers less, the kids of color rise. So that's exactly the question for our county.
One last question. Knowing that and identifying the structure that you have and having the data from time of initial call to the police and the time that that individual is brought in to custody, though that data is not showing anything that would identify why these numbers are disproportionate?
I don't have that data. I can talk to you only about once the kids enter the youth center.
The other point I just want to say is I've been in this community most of my life, and about maybe a number of months ago we had the county attorney out doing a community forum. That's the second time I've seen him in my life in the community. And one of the staff members who's responsible for juvenile justice, that was her first time. And again, as more and more people understand what they do, the more we can reduce those numbers. The other thing that's related, one of our community members do not know the difference per se between the county attorney and the county defender. And so again, this brings back the point. The more you understand the systems, you can challenge the system, and the more those people who work in those offices downtown understand our community, then they will get hopefully the same breaks as other kids get. So the more that we deconstruct, I keep using that word, it's about building social capitals, giving the very people who get their incomes off the public to be much more accountable to make sure these numbers are not as they are.
Thank you, guys.
So we'll have them out again for another breakout session. Actually, when you look at the back of your agenda, we have those different strategic areas. So we'll have them come out, do another presentation. We'll get the updated numbers once they get in. And so try to be respectful of your time. We're going to go ahead and close out today's meeting in prayer. And we will see you guys Friday at the conference.
Father, we just thank you so much for each person here. We thank you for Janae, Shelly, now Jamal, and God. We just thank you too for Tila and so many others that work in this area. Father, we just pray. I want to pray particularly, as even been mentioned, God, I just want to pray that fathers would continue to be raised up, God, that whether it be uncles or others that would reject custody, accept responsibilities, be courageous, and invest in children. So, Father, we just thank you, God, for the hearts here. We thank you there has been some reformation, but we pray, God, that it will continue to change, and God, that just more than anything, God, we want this city to continue to thrive and be better together. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for your time, everyone.